Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. Let's talk about Godzilla Minus One. I really enjoyed this movie, and because this is a positive review, I know most people are not going to watch it. But for those of you who are going to watch it, I want to tell you not just that I like this movie and that I think it's good. In fact, I think it's the best Godzilla movie since the original, but why it's so good. And the reason it's good is not the special effects, though it did win the Oscar for best special effects, I guess. So if anyone's telling you, by the way, that you have to spend $200 million to make a big special effects spectacle movie, you could just point them at Godzilla Minus One, which did it on a tiny fraction of a Hollywood budget. It's really something special that they were able to do that. But what makes the movie good is not the special effects, but the story. The storytelling techniques, which are classic techniques, well executed, that's what makes the movie worth watching. There's a little bit more to it than that because the focus on the movie is not Godzilla. Rather, it's going back to like the roots of the original movie from 1954 where Godzilla is an existential threat and the focus is on the characters and their drama, their motivations, why they want to fight Godzilla, what they're thinking about with Godzilla. That's where the focus of the movie is, and the movie is so much better than a Hollywood production because of that. I notice my main complaint with most Hollywood movies is the writing, despite that being like the cheapest part of production. This is the opposite. The best part of this movie is the writing, and it's the writing which makes the movie really worth watching. So let me go through some things with that, and you can use these techniques with some of your work as well if you're a creative person, whether you're working in books or some other form of media. These are classic techniques. So let's start with the focus on the human drama rather than the monster, because I think this is a good point to make, is that a lot of horror movies, as they gain sequels, as they become a franchise, the focus becomes the monster. The monster himself becomes the star of the show, whether that's like Friday the 13th or it's Nightmare on Elm Street. It becomes like Freddy becomes the star of the show and not so much the characters trying to survive or destroy the monster. Godzilla is a really perfect example of this because Godzilla transformed really quickly and has done this in like every reboot and every era of Godzilla. Goes from being an existential threat against Japan to being like a wrestling champion where he's fighting other kaiju, and the focus becomes about the giant kaiju action fights and not so much what the characters are doing about it. In this case, Godzilla Minus One, our focus is very much on the characters. This takes place, the setting is directly following World War II, so Japan's defeat in World War II. At the very beginning of the movie, we have the protagonist Koichi. He lands his plane on this remote island. It turns out he's a kamikaze pilot, and he didn't want to complete his last mission. During the night, Godzilla attacks. Now, it's a little mini Godzilla. There's a little Godzilla that comes out of the ocean and attacks the men. Koichi's unable, he freezes up in fear, basically, and is unable to get into his fighter and shoot Godzilla with the guns on his fighter. That sets up a whole redemption arc for Koichi for the rest of the movie. He has survived World War II when he should have died. He survives the Godzilla attack when Godzilla should have killed him. It kills all the other men on the island except for him and one mechanic. And the mechanic feels very much like it's Koichi's fault for not shooting Godzilla. Now, this setup's really good because we, sitting here in 2024 or whenever watching this, know, first of all, that Koichi fulfilling his suicide mission was not going to win the war for Japan. That the defeat of Japan in World War II was really inevitable at that point. He didn't need to be a kamikaze pilot. So we really forgive him for not committing suicide to no effect for anyone really other than himself. And because this is like the 33rd Godzilla movie, I think, we also are generally going to forgive him for not shooting Godzilla because we know it's probably not going to kill Godzilla. All right, we're watching a Godzilla movie. So though we start with a really massive humbling experience for this character and invite him to grow and to reclaim his honor, we also are able to understand that because of where we are sitting at the audience long after the war and understanding the context of everything that's going in there. What matters though is how Koichi feels about it. He has massive survivor's guilt, and he has massive like coward's guilt. Like he hasn't done his duty. He chickened out. He didn't do what he was supposed to do, which would have been to commit suicide and die. That theme permeates its way through the entire movie and affects every single character, because most of the male characters are veterans of the war. And so being veterans of a war which has been lost, they, in a certain sense, all feel a little bit like Koichi. They've survived the war. They weren't able to ensure victory for Japan, and in fact have lost the war, and they don't know what that means for them. They don't know how to contextualize the suffering they had with the war, what they struggled for, and the fact that some of their compatriots died while they survived. And so when Godzilla shows up to be a threat against Japan, they're able to have an opportunity to reclaim the honor that wasn't afforded to them in the war. That they have an ability to defend their homeland in a really honorable way. That it's stripped away from all the politics of that time, all the maybe the negative things that the Japanese government may have done at that time, and it's just about those veterans wanting to fight for their country. They get an opportunity for redemption in fighting Godzilla. So Koichi is sort of the microcosm of the macro of all of the characters, especially in the final act, looking to fulfill their duty and to help Japan. So Koichi has survivor's guilt. There's even a character who was too young to fight in the war. He has survivor's guilt about it. He really wants to participate in the final mission, even though it's very, very dangerous. And the other veterans are like, no, you should be glad that you didn't have to fight in the war and that this didn't affect you, and you should go home. Now, of course, he gets an opportunity to fulfill that honor by helping them in the final act. Everything that is set up gets a fulfillment in the final act. And that's just so satisfying to watch in 2024, where you set something up and then you give it to the audience at the end, and you give it to them in a way that they hoped for, but they didn't know if it was really going to happen. So Yamazaki is really able to keep the tension going for all of those little threads of, is he really going to help people? Is he really going to be not showing up in the last scene? And what we really get in the last act that I love is that Koichi really gets set up to redeem his honor by doing what he didn't do in the war, which is by flying his plane suicidally into Godzilla to blow it up, right? To commit suicide, to have a suicide mission to save everybody. And we have this question of like, is Koichi really going to do that? Now, to make that the consequence of that, make that decision really have a lot of weight, Koichi is given a lot of things that are worth fighting for. Where he was a single man and he came home to find his parents dead from the fire bombings and had nothing, he does something honorable almost right away to repair the cowardice that we see in the first couple of scenes. And he takes in this starving woman and this orphan child, and he cares for them, right? He gets a job sweeping mines, which is a dangerous job. So he is able to kind of start crawling out of the hole that he's in by clearing the minefield and making the world safer and putting himself at risk by doing it. And then he's providing for this strange woman and his child. Basically, he over the course of a couple of years, he is given a family that he feels like he doesn't deserve. So that not only heightens the personal drama of like, I have this thing, I've survived, and then I have what I don't deserve. But then when we get to the final act, when it comes to the possibility of self-sacrifice, what am I going to lose when I die, and what do I have a responsibility to live for? Because at the end of it, it is this little girl, this little kid who has to be taken care of. And if he dies, who's going to take care of her? And we are in doubt about that all the way till the end, even though we have a pretty good idea and a pretty good hope of what he's going to do in the last scene, that he's not going to end up committing suicide. We have enough story tension, enough uncertainty about it that it really makes the drama of those final scenes have a great payoff. So it's really about the human drama. It's about the people struggling to reclaim their honor. I love that theme. I think it works really beautifully. There's some other things that I really like too. I like that the men who go to fight Godzilla are not a hyper-funded government organization with like a super weapon like the Oxygen Destroyer. They are private, at this point, they're private citizens. They're veterans, but they're private citizens. The government won't help them. The United States government won't help them. With the backstory that like the MacArthur's worried about the Soviets or something. No one will help them. They're alone. They have to do this on their own via their own ingenuity, their own impetus, their own contribution to it. There's no money. It's for their own personal honor. I really love that. And I really love that it's private enterprise who ends up taking charge and doing the work that's necessary to destroy Godzilla rather than some hyper-competent government organization. And I think the fact that it's set after World War II, you're really able to sell that. It's like the government's really non-functional at that point. They really can't do anything to help anyone. There's even a toy company that participates in it. This toy company is going to help with this final plan to kill Godzilla. They're not going to kill Godzilla with a super weapon. They're going to kill Godzilla using clever physics. They're going to sink him down to the bottom of the ocean and then raise him back up again, and that change in pressure will rip his body apart like it would any creature. That change from that massive pressure at the bottom of the ocean to this less pressure when he gets to the surface. But of course that's not going to be enough, and of course Koichi, the main character, he has a strong suspicion that's not going to be enough. His job is to lure Godzilla back out into the ocean using this fighter. Well, of course he loads the fighter up with explosives like he's going to do a suicide mission. So you have this question at the end: is Koichi gonna follow through with it? Is he gonna feel like he has to reclaim his honor by committing suicide? And we have lots of other characters that are pushing in. It's like, no, we're gonna do this mission without anyone dying. This is not a suicide mission against Godzilla. We are getting together to protect ourselves and protect Japan, but our lives have value. We're not going to do the whole life is worthless thing anymore. We are really going to care about bringing all our men home from the mission. So I think it does a really, really good job at that. We have some great drama with, like I said, the main character Koichi, with some of the auxiliary characters. You have a veteran boat captain. You have a veteran scientist who's been humbled by being forced to sweep mines, but of course his expertise will come extremely valuable, come in very handy in the second and third act. If I'm thinking of any kind of negative criticisms, it's really stuff that I can understand the compromise on. And that's mostly in the second act when Godzilla is appearing out of the ocean. We don't have a big explanation of how Godzilla went from a dinosaur-sized creature to a kaiju. Other than we see the bomb go off on the Bikini Atoll, this like giant atom bomb test that the United States did, and we see like Godzilla being burned under the water, and then that presumably will transform him into Godzilla. We fill in the gaps because this is the 33rd Godzilla movie. I can kind of understand rushing through that, but it does really feel like they rushed through that explanation there. And at the same time, there's a point where this minesweeping boat is being forced to fight Godzilla in what I would call a rather incredulous setup. They are able to figure out how to fight Godzilla rather quickly. They're able to deal with the kaiju and kind of surmise how they're going to end up fighting him in a somewhat rushed and unbelievable fashion. I kind of understand why Yamazaki did a lot of this, is that you don't have a strict upper limit on runtime for movies, but you really want to keep it short enough that the action is always moving forward. So that second act, things just happened to me a little too quickly with a little too not quite enough explanation. The characters are intuiting an awful lot about Godzilla and what his weaknesses are and how he works and how he can be expected to act in order to have the plan and the setup for the final act and the big battle, the big attempt to destroy Godzilla at the end. So I kind of understand rushing through those paces because you want to keep the movie within a reasonable runtime, but it did feel rushed in that middle act. So that's my only negative criticism. And again, it's a little bit of a story criticism. It's not so much an aesthetics criticism or anything like that. And in fact, a lot of ways, I mentioned that this reminded me of the early 50s movies, and it does in more than one way, more than just the story, but also like the acting feels kind of like the way acting used to be seen on the screen, which nowadays we see very subdued acting with a lot of close-ups, and they will overdub the voice to get that kind of close mic sound, that's what we see a lot with modern productions. This, however, felt more like a classic production. The acting is a little more active. It's a little more in your face. It's a little more emotive. And someone might give that there's no negative criticism there. I'm just saying it reminds me of the older way that movies were made, in to me a positive way. Slightly nostalgic to think of how movies felt in the 50s or 60s. Not that I was there, but I've watched movies from the 50s or 60s with more direct acting and more emotion, like you're really delivering the emotion for the audience and not being completely subtle. So overall, I think it's a great movie. I would recommend watching it and paying attention to those writing techniques. We have lots of Chekhov's guns, and we have lots of emotional Chekhov's guns, and those things show up, and you know that they're going to be used, but Yamazaki is so good at doing them. There's always a story tension as to whether the character is really going to do the virtuous thing or not, whether he's really going to do what you want him to or not, or what exactly is going to happen in that final battle. We have an idea of how it's going to go, but we still have enough uncertainty, even after 33 Godzilla movies, that I think it makes for a great climax. But to me, what makes the climax great is that the characters, it's really all about the characters and what they have to fight for and how they're feeling about the entire situation. So overall, I liked it. I think it's a great kaiju movie. One of the best that I've seen, a great return to form. I think it's also great to watch that 1954 original, even if it's in black and white and it's not quite as spectacular to look at. It really is a cool movie to watch, and it has great atmosphere, in my opinion. And this one I felt had a really good atmosphere as well. One of the things that I liked about the effects, I guess before I go, is that we don't see a whole lot of just seeing Godzilla do things. Rather, we see pieces of Godzilla. Most of the fighting of Godzilla happens in the ocean, where we don't have a sense of how big he is or exactly what he looks like. That is good monster technique for horror movies. We don't want to just see the monster. We want to imagine the monster. We want to see a piece of the monster, and the imagination will fill in the horror of the rest. We do see all of Godzilla, even during the day at one point in the movie, so it's not like we never see Godzilla. But there's more shots that are pieces of Godzilla, which I think is very effective. Very effective use of how you're going to frame the monster to make him more frightening and more horrific in a lot of ways. And believe me, this design of Godzilla, this is definitely one of my top designs of Godzilla that I've seen so far. He has the feeling of like that, the atmosphere of that original, but he's so much more detailed and so much more horrific looking and scary looking, and still has what I would say for that feeling that it's a cognitive monster. The monster's thinking and reacting and seeing things rather than just being like a pure chaotic force, which he is sometimes. So anyway, great use of the monster as well, but it's mainly about the storytelling. Leave me your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear them, and whether you liked Godzilla Minus One and whether you liked the story and the writing. It turns out if you make a competent story, you use classic storytelling techniques, you execute them well, it makes for a really enjoyable experience without having to spend $200 million on CGI, right? You can spend, I guess, a lot. I don't know what the budget was. I think it was like 10 or 12 million. A whole lot less than a Hollywood budget, and it does so much more because the writing is so much better. So have a great one, folks, and I'll see you all next time. Links down below to my Patreon. You get a free book every month if you are a Patreon supporter. So please check that out. The book selection's rotating. You actually get several. You actually get, right now you can get 3 books that haven't even been released yet, the King Leopard books, so you can check those out, and I will see you all next time.